They say the desert remembers everything. Every drop of blood spilled on its sand, every broken promise, every act of betrayal. And sometimes it decides to collect what's owed. My name is Jacob Thornton, and in August of 1881, I rode with a cavalry patrol out of Fort Defiance in the Arizona Territory. We were tasked with escorting a silver shipment from the mines near Ganado to the railroad depot in Gallup, a 3-day ride through Navajo land, through the heart of the Painted Desert. We never made it to Gallup. Only 2 of us made it out of that desert alive, and what we saw out there, what rode alongside us in the darkness, it wasn't human, it wasn't alive, but it was hungry for justice. The Navajo guide we'd hired, a man named Hastin So, he warned us before we left Fort Defiance. He pointed to the western horizon, where storm clouds were gathering over the mesas, and he said, "The Chindi are restless tonight, the spirits of the unavenged dead. If we ride west, we ride into their hunting ground." Our captain laughed in his face, called him a superstitious savage, told him we were paying him to guide, not to tell ghost stories. Hastin So looked at each of us, his dark eyes filled with something I didn't understand then. Pity, maybe, or resignation. Then he said, "When you see riders on the horizon at sunset, do not look at their faces, do not speak their names, and whatever you do, do not try to outrun them. The dead always catch the guilty." By the second night, half our patrol was dead. By the third night, we understood why the Navajo fear the Chindi, and why some debts can never be forgiven. This is what happened when we rode into the land of the Ghost Riders. Fort Defiance, Arizona Territory, August 12, 1881. The fort sat in a valley between red sandstone cliffs about 30 miles west of the New Mexico border. It had been established in 1851 as a military post to control the Navajo people, and by 1881 it was a grim collection of adobe buildings and wooden barracks surrounded by a stockade fence that was more symbolic than defensive. I was a 26-year-old lieutenant, fresh from West Point, assigned to Captain Marcus Brennan's Company D of the 6th Cavalry Regiment. This was my first posting in the Arizona Territory, and I was eager to prove myself. Captain Brennan was a veteran of the Civil War and the Indian Wars, a hard man with a gray beard and eyes like flint. He'd been fighting in the Southwest for 15 years, and he had the kind of casual cruelty that comes from seeing too much death and causing too much of it himself. Our patrol consisted of 12 men: Captain Brennan, myself, Sergeant William Kowalski, a Polish immigrant who joined the army to earn his citizenship, and 9 enlisted men. Most were Irish or German immigrants, young men who'd taken the Army's dollar because they had no other options. The silver shipment we were escorting belonged to the Ganado Mining Company, operated by a man named Ezra Whitmore. The company had been extracting silver from Navajo land for 3 years, paying the government a pittance in lease fees while making a fortune. The Navajo themselves saw none of the profits, of course. That's how it worked in those days. Hastin So arrived at the fort on the morning of August 13th. He was maybe 50 years old, lean and weathered, dressed in traditional Navajo clothing, a velveteen shirt, silver concho belt, and deerskin leggings. He wore his hair long, tied back with red cloth, and around his neck hung a medicine bag made of soft leather. Captain Brennan met him in the fort's courtyard. I was present for the conversation, along with Sergeant Kowalski. "You're the guide?" Brennan asked, looking so up and down with barely concealed contempt. "I am Husteen Tso," the Navajo man replied in careful English. "I know the desert trails. I know where water can be found. I know the safe places to camp." "Can you get us to Gallup in 3 days?" "Yes, if we take the northern route through Chuska Valley. It is longer, but safer." Brennan shook his head. "We are taking the direct route, straight west through the Painted Desert. We'll cut a full day off the journey." Husteen Tso's expression darkened. "That is not wise, Captain. That land is troubled, especially now, in the month when the spirits walk." "I don't give a damn about your spirits," Brennan snapped. "We have a schedule to keep and a valuable cargo to protect. You'll guide us the way I tell you, or you can go back to your Hogan and we'll find someone else." Tso was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, 23 years ago, in the summer of 1858, a group of Navajo families were camped near Bidahochi in the Painted Desert. They were peaceful people, returning from a trading journey to Zuni Pueblo. They had women with them, children. "Get to the point," Brennan said. "A cavalry patrol from this fort attacked them at dawn. The soldiers were looking for raiders who had stolen cattle, but these families had stolen nothing. They were innocent. The soldiers killed them anyway, all of them, even the children." Sergeant Kowalski shifted uncomfortably beside me. I saw something flicker in Brennan's eyes, recognition maybe, or guilt. "That was a long time ago," Brennan said flatly. "Ancient history. The desert does not forget," Tso replied. "The Chindi, the spirits of those who died violently, unjustly, they remain in that place. They ride at sunset, looking for those who wronged them, looking for soldiers in blue coats." "Well, I guess we'd better watch out for ghosts then. Are you coming or not?" Tso looked past Brennan, towards the western horizon. I followed his gaze and saw storm clouds gathering over the distant mesas, dark and roiling despite the clear sky overhead. "I will guide you," Tso said finally, "but I will not be responsible for what happens. The Chindi do not forgive, and they do not forget." We departed Fort Defiance at noon on August 13th. The silver shipment, 6 wooden crates containing approximately $50,000 in refined silver bars, was loaded on 2 pack mules. We rode in a column formation, Brennan at the front with Tso, me and Kowalski in the middle with the pack mules, and the enlisted men spread out as flankers and rear guard. The day was brutally hot, over 100 degrees, and the sun beat down on us like a hammer. We rode west into the Painted Desert, into a landscape of red and orange sandstone, twisted hoodoos, and vast expanses of nothing.
By late afternoon, we'd covered maybe 15 miles. The terrain grew stranger as we went deeper into the desert. The rock formations took on bizarre shapes, pillars that looked like petrified giants, arches that framed the sky like doorways to nowhere. The colors shifted from red to purple to deep orange as the sun began its descent. That's when Hastin So stopped his horse suddenly. "What is it?" Brennan demanded. So was staring at something on the ground. I rode forward to see. There, in the red sand, were tracks, hoof prints, dozens of them, maybe more, all heading in the same direction we were traveling. "Unshod horses," Kowalski observed. "Indian ponies." But So shook his head slowly. "No, look closer." I dismounted and knelt beside the tracks. That's when I saw what So meant. The hoof prints were wrong. They were too deep, as if the horses that made them were carrying enormous weight. And they were perfectly uniform, every print exactly the same size and depth, like they'd been stamped into the sand by a machine rather than made by living animals. "What could make tracks like this?" I asked. So didn't answer. He was looking at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw fear in his eyes. "We need to make camp," he said urgently, "now, before the sun goes down." "We've got another hour of daylight," Brennan protested. "We can cover another 5 miles. "No," So said firmly, "we stop here. We build a fire, and we do not leave the circle of firelight until dawn. This is not a request, Captain. This is survival." Brennan studied So's face, and something he saw there must have convinced him, because he nodded curtly. "All right, we'll camp here. Kowalski, set up a perimeter. Thornton, get those mules secured. Everyone else gather firewood. We're gonna need a lot of it." As we made camp in the shadow of a massive sandstone formation the Navajo called Sebitai, the winged rock, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The desert around us was silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just an oppressive, waiting silence. The sun touched the horizon, and the sky exploded into colors, deep reds, purples, oranges that seemed to pulse and shift. And that's when I saw them. Riders. On the horizon, maybe 20 of them, silhouetted against the dying light. They sat perfectly still on their horses, watching us. "Captain," I said quietly, pointing. Brennan turned, and I heard him suck in a breath. Every man in our patrol had stopped what they were doing, staring at the distant figures. "Navajo?" Kowalski asked. "No," Hastin So said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Chindi, the ghost riders, they have found us." We built the fire high, using every piece of dead wood we could find in the surrounding area. Hastin So arranged stones in a circle around our camp, and from his medicine bag he produced small pouches of what he said were sacred herbs: sage, cedar, and something else I didn't recognize. "This will help," he said, sprinkling the herbs on the stones. "But it may not be enough. The Chindi are strong here. This is their place." "Who are they?" I asked, watching the distant riders. They hadn't moved. They just sat there on the horizon, backlit by the fading sun. So settled by the fire, his face grave. In 1858, a lieutenant named Harrison Caldwell led a patrol from Fort Defiance. They were hunting for Navajo raiders. But Caldwell was a cruel man, a man who saw all Navajo as enemies. When his patrol came upon the families at Bidahochi, he did not ask questions. He did not check if they were the raiders he sought. He simply attacked.
The families tried to surrender. The women held up their children, showing they were not warriors. But Caldwell gave the order to fire anyway. 23 people died that morning. Men, women, children. The youngest was only 3 years old. "Jesus," Kowalski muttered, making the sign of the cross. The Navajo elders performed the proper ceremonies. They tried to help the spirits move on to the next world. But the deaths were too violent, too unjust. The spirits could not rest. They became chindi, angry ghosts trapped between worlds, seeking revenge on those who killed them. "But that was 21 years ago," I said. "Everyone involved in that massacre must be dead or retired by now." Brennan's face had gone pale. He was staring into the fire, not meeting anyone's eyes. "Captain," I said, "did you know about this?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I was there, at Bidehochi. I was a sergeant under Caldwell. I tried to stop it. I told Caldwell those people weren't raiders, but he wouldn't listen. And when the shooting started, he trailed off." "You participated?" So said. It wasn't a question. "I followed orders," Brennan said, his voice hard. "That's what soldiers do." "And now the debt comes due," So replied. "The Chindi have been waiting for the soldiers who killed them to return to this place, and you have brought them here." "That's insane," Brennan snapped. "Those are just Navajo scouts out there, probably keeping an eye on us to make sure we don't cause trouble." "Then why don't they come closer?" So asked. "Why do they only watch from the horizon?" As if an answer to his question, the riders began to move, not toward us, but parallel to our position, circling slowly. They moved in perfect unison, like a single organism. And as they moved, I realized something that made my blood run cold. They made no sound, no hoofbeats, no jingle of tack, nothing. They moved in absolute silence across the desert floor. "Mother of God," one of the enlisted men whispered. His name was Patrick O'Brien, a young Irish emigrant from Boston. "That ain't natural. Stay in the firelight," So commanded. "No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, do not leave the circle. The Chindi cannot cross the sacred stones while the fire burns." The sun finally set, and darkness fell over the desert like a curtain. Our fire seemed pitifully small against the vast emptiness around us. The riders had disappeared into the darkness, but I could feel them out there, watching, waiting. We organized watches, 2 men awake at all times, the rest trying to sleep. I took the first watch with Kowalski. We sat with our backs to the fire, rifles across our laps, staring into the darkness. "You believe this ghost story?" Kowalski asked quietly. "I don't know what I believe," I admitted, "but those riders, there was something wrong about them." That's when we heard the first voice. It came from the darkness beyond our camp, maybe 50 yards out. A woman's voice, speaking in Navajo. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. She was calling for help. Hastin So, who was supposed to be sleeping, sat up suddenly. His face was stricken. "That is my sister's voice," he whispered. "But my sister died 10 years ago." The voice called again, closer now. Then another voice joined it, a man's voice, then a child's. Soon there were dozens of voices all around us, calling out in Navajo and broken English. "Help us! We are cold! Why did you kill us? We were innocent!"
Private O'Brien stood up suddenly, his eyes wide. "That's my mother," he said. "That's my mother's voice. She's calling me." "Sit down, Private," Brennan ordered. "That's not your mother."
"But I hear her. She's out there. She needs help." O'Brien started walking toward the edge of the firelight. Kowalski and I jumped up to stop him, but he was surprisingly strong, driven by whatever he was hearing. We wrestled him to the ground, and he fought us, screaming, "Let me go! She needs me! Mother!" That's when something appeared at the edge of our firelight. A figure, tall and thin, wrapped in what looked like rotting buckskin. Its face was in shadow, but I could see its eyes. They glowed with a faint, sickly green light. It reached out one hand toward O'Brien, and I saw that its fingers were too long, the joints bending in ways human joints shouldn't bend. Its mouth opened, and a sound came out that was like wind through a canyon, like the cry of a dying animal, like nothing I'd ever heard. Hastin Tso threw a handful of herbs into the fire. The flames flared up bright and white, and the figure recoiled, vanishing back into the darkness. O'Brien collapsed, sobbing. We dragged him back to the center of camp. His nose was bleeding, and his eyes were unfocused. "What was that?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "A chindi," Tso said. "A ghost. They are testing our defenses, seeing if they can draw us out." "Will the fire hold them?" Brennan asked. For the first time since I'd met him, he sounded afraid. "Until dawn," Tso said. "But we must keep it burning. If the flames die, the stones will not protect us." We spent the rest of that night feeding the fire and listening to the voices. They never stopped. Sometimes they spoke in English, sometimes in Navajo, sometimes in languages I didn't recognize. They called our names, they imitated our loved ones, they promised us things: safety, wealth, forgiveness. Private O'Brien rocked back and forth, his hands over his ears, muttering prayers in Gaelic. 2 other men were crying silently. Even Sergeant Kowalski, tough as nails, looked shaken. I saw them several more times that night, the figures at the edge of the firelight. Sometimes they looked almost human, sometimes they were just shadows with glowing eyes. Once I saw what looked like a child, standing just beyond the stones, staring at us with eyes that were empty holes. When dawn finally broke, the voices stopped. The oppressive presence that had surrounded us all night lifted suddenly, like a weight being removed from our chests. We were all exhausted, traumatized, but alive. "We need to turn back," I said to Brennan. "We need to go back to Fort Defiance." "We're halfway to Gallup," Brennan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We can't turn back now." "Captain, those things will come back tonight, and I don't think the fire will hold them a second time. They're getting stronger." Brennan looked at Hastin Tso. "Is there another way, a way that avoids this?" Tso shook his head. "We are in their territory now. They will follow us wherever we go. The only question is whether we face them in the open desert or in a place of power." "A place of power?" "There is an old Pueblo ruin, half a day's ride west. It was built by the Anasazi, the ancient ones, long before the Navajo came to this land. It has strong medicine. If we can reach it before sunset, we may survive another night." So we rode on, deeper into the painted desert, toward an ancient ruin and whatever waited us there. Behind us, I could see dust rising on the horizon. The ghost riders were following.
We rode hard through the morning heat, pushing our horses to their limits. The pack mules carrying the silver struggled to keep pace. Private O'Brien had to be tied to his saddle. He was barely conscious, muttering to himself in a language that wasn't quite English and wasn't quite anything else. The landscape grew more alien as we went deeper into the desert.
We passed through a forest of stone pillars that the Navajo called Tse-Bi-Ndizgai, the Valley of the Standing Rocks. The formations towered over us, casting long shadows even at midday. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, nothing lived here. Around 2 in the afternoon, we saw it. The Pueblo ruin perched on a mesa top like a crown of broken teeth. It was massive, much larger than I'd expected. The walls were made of sandstone blocks, fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed. Parts of the structure had collapsed over the centuries, but much of it still stood, defiant against time and weather. Pueblo Bonito, Jacinto said, the beautiful village. It was abandoned 700 years ago. No one knows why the ancient ones left, but the Navajo do not come here. This place has its own spirits. Better or worse than the Chindi? Kowalski asked. Different, Toe replied. The spirits here are old. They do not care about the conflicts of men, but they do not welcome intruders either. We climbed the narrow trail to the mesa top, leading our horses carefully over loose rock. The sun was beginning its descent, and we had maybe 3 hours until dark. We had to be inside the ruin, with defenses prepared before the ghost riders came. The Pueblo was a maze of rooms and corridors, some open to the sky, others still roofed with ancient timbers. We found a large central courtyard, what Jacinto called a plaza, that would serve as our defensive position. There was even an old kiva, a circular ceremonial chamber sunk into the ground that we could use for shelter if needed. This is good, Jacinto said, examining the space. The walls are strong. There is only one entrance to this plaza. We can defend it. While the men set up camp and prepared defenses, I explored some of the surrounding rooms. In one chamber, I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratches on the walls. Not ancient petroglyphs, but fresh marks carved into the stone recently. They formed words in English. They came at sunset. We couldn't stop them. God forgive us for what we did. And a date, 1858. Captain, I need you to see this. Brennan came into the chamber, followed by Toe. When Brennan saw the writing, his face went gray. This is Caldwell's handwriting, Lieutenant Caldwell. After the massacre at Bidahochi, he led the survivors here. They were trying to escape the Chindi, just like us. What happened to them? I asked. Brennan pointed to another section of wall. More scratches, increasingly frantic. They're in the walls. Jenkins is dead. They're wearing our faces. No one leaves. The final message was just one word, carved deep into the stone. Guilty. Caldwell and his men never made it back to Fort Defiance. The official report said they were killed by Navajo warriors, but that was a lie. They died here, hunted by the spirits of those they murdered. How do you know? I asked. Because my grandfather was part of the search party that found them 3 weeks later. He said their bodies were wrong, dried out,
like they'd been dead for years instead of weeks, and their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Brennan sank down against the wall, his rifle clattering to the floor. "I should have died with them," he said. "I was supposed to be on that patrol, but I got sick the night before they left. Fever. I stayed at Fort Defiance while they rode out here. I survived because I was lucky." "Not lucky," Toe said. "The Chindi let you live. They wanted you to suffer with the knowledge of what you'd done. They wanted you to carry the guilt, and they knew that one day you would return to their land, and when you did, they would be waiting."
This whole thing was a trap, I said, understanding dawning. The silver shipment, the route through the painted desert, they knew we'd come this way. They've been hurting us here. Yes, Saucy confirmed. The Chindi are not mindless spirits. They think. They plan. They have waited 23 years for this moment, for the soldiers who killed them to return to the place of their death. But most of us weren't even born when that massacre happened, Kowalski protested. Why punish us for something we didn't do? You wear the same uniform, Saucy said simply. You serve the same army. To the Chindi, you are all guilty. We returned to the plaza as the sun touched the horizon. The men had built a large fire in the center of the courtyard and barricaded the entrance with stones and timber. We had our rifles loaded, though I doubted bullets would do much good against ghosts. Hastin Tsosi performed a ceremony, walking around the perimeter of the plaza, singing in Navajo and sprinkling sacred herbs. When he finished, he looked exhausted. It is done, but I do not know if it will be enough. This place has power, yes, but the Chindi are very strong, and they are very angry. The sun set, and they came. This time we could see them clearly. 23 riders on 23 horses emerging from the desert like smoke given form. They rode up the mesa trail in single file, moving with that same eerie silence. As they drew closer, I could see their faces. They were Navajo, men, women, even children, but they were wrong. Their skin was gray and desiccated. Their eyes glowed with that sickly green light. Their mouths hung open in silent screams. And they were all wearing the clothes they died in, clothes that were torn and stained with blood that never dried. They surrounded the plaza, sitting on their ghost horses, watching us. One of them, a man who might have been a warrior in life, raised his hand and pointed at Captain Brennan. Then they all began to speak, their voices overlapping, creating a horrible chorus. Guilty, guilty, guilty. We were innocent. You killed us. You killed our children. Now you will pay. Private O'Brien started screaming. He pulled his pistol and fired wildly at the Ghost Riders. The bullets passed through them like they were made of smoke. One of the riders, a woman holding a ghost child, turned to look at O'Brien. She smiled, and her smile was full of broken teeth. O'Brien's screaming stopped abruptly. He stood perfectly still, his eyes glazing over. Then he turned and walked toward the barricaded entrance. "Stop him!" I shouted. But before we could reach him, O'Brien climbed over the barricade and walked out into the plaza beyond, toward the Ghost Riders. They parted to let him through, and he disappeared into the darkness with them. We heard him screaming for maybe 5 minutes, then silence. That's when they started coming through the walls. Not over them or around them, through them. They passed through the solid stone like it wasn't there, emerging into our plaza like nightmares made flesh. The sacred herbs Tsosi had placed seemed to slow them down, but not stop them. "The kiva!" Tsosi shouted. "Get into the kiva! It's the most sacred space. They may not be able to enter." We scrambled down the ladder into the circular chamber, pulling the silver crates with us. It was cramped and dark, lit only by a single lantern. 10 of us remained. Brennan, myself, Kowalski, Tsosi, and 6 enlisted men. Above us, we could hear them moving through the plaza. Footsteps that made no sound, voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And underneath it all, a sound like wind through a canyon, like the desert itself was breathing. "How long can we stay down here?" one of the men asked. His name was Heinrich Müller, a German immigrant. "Until dawn," Tsosi said. "If we can survive until dawn, they will retreat. They always retreat at dawn." "And then what?" Brennan asked. "We can't stay here forever. We'll run out of food and water." "Then we die," Tsosi said flatly. "Unless what?" "The Chindi seek justice. They seek those who wronged them. If we give them what they want, if we give them the guilty, they may let the innocent go." Every eye in that kiva turned to Captain Brennan.
"No," I said immediately. "We're not doing that. We're not sacrificing anyone." "He's guilty," one of the enlisted men said. His name was James Crawford, a hard-faced man from Tennessee. "He admitted it. He was part of that massacre. Maybe if we give them what they want, they'll leave the rest of us alone." "We don't know that," Kowalski argued. "For all we know, they'll kill us all anyway." "At least we'd have a chance," Crawford shot back. "Right now, we're just waiting to die." Brennan sat with his back against the kiva wall, his rifle across his lap. He looked old suddenly, worn down by years of guilt and fear. "Oh, maybe they're right," he said quietly. "Maybe this is what I deserve. I've been running from what I did for 23 years. Maybe it's time to face it." "Captain, you can't—" "I can, and I will," Brennan interrupted. "I'm ordering you, Lieutenant Thornton, to take command of this patrol. Get these men to Gallup. Complete the mission." "The mission doesn't matter anymore," I said. "The silver doesn't matter. Staying alive matters." "The lieutenant's right," Kowalski said. "We're not giving you up, Captain. We'll find another way." But I could see the doubt in the other men's faces. They were terrified, desperate, and looking for any way out. And Brennan was offering them one. Hostine Tussaud had been silent through this exchange, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "There may be another way. A way that does not require Captain Brennan's death, but does require his acknowledgement of guilt." "What do you mean?" I asked. "In Navajo tradition, when a wrong has been committed, it can be balanced through ceremony, through acknowledgement, apology, and restitution. The Chindi are angry because their deaths were never acknowledged, because no one ever said, 'We were wrong, we are sorry, we will make this right.'" "You want me to apologize to ghosts?" Brennan said incredulously. "I want you to face them," Tussaud replied, "to speak the truth about what happened, to acknowledge their innocence and your guilt. It may not be enough. They may kill you anyway, but it is the only path I see that offers hope for all of us." Brennan was quiet for a long time. Above us, The Ghost Riders continued their vigil, waiting. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'll do it. But if this doesn't work, if they kill me and keep coming, you all run. You understand? You take the horses and you ride to Gallop and you don't look back." "We're not leaving you," I said. "That's an order, Lieutenant." We waited until midnight, the darkest hour, when Tissot said the spirits would be most receptive to communication. Then we climbed back up the ladder into the plaza. They were waiting for us, all 23 of them, arranged in a circle around the Kiva entrance. Their ghost horses stood perfectly still, and the riders sat like statues, their glowing eyes fixed on us. Brennan stepped forward, and I saw his hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "My name is Marcus Brennan. 23 years ago, I was a sergeant in the United States Army 6th Cavalry Regiment. On the morning of August 3rd, 1858, I participated in an attack on a group of Navajo families camped near Bidahochi." The Ghost Riders didn't move, but I felt the air grow colder. "We were told they were raiders. We were told they had stolen cattle and killed settlers. But when we found them, I could see they were just families, peaceful people. They had children with them. They tried to surrender." His voice broke. "I knew it was wrong. I knew we shouldn't attack. But I followed orders. I raised my rifle, and I fired. I killed a man who was holding his daughter, trying to protect her. I killed them both." Tears were streaming down Brennan's face now. "I've lived with that for 23 years. I've seen their faces every night when I close my eyes. I've heard that little girl crying. I've carried the guilt like a stone in my chest, getting heavier every day." He fell to his knees. "You were innocent. You did nothing wrong, and we murdered you. I murdered you, and I am sorry. God help me. I am so sorry." For a long moment, nothing happened. The Ghost Rider sat motionless, and the only sound was Brennan's sobbing. Then, slowly, one of the riders dismounted. It was the woman with the child, the one who had smiled at Private O'Brien. She walked towards Brennan, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. She stopped in front of him and looked down. Her face was a ruin of dried flesh and exposed bone, but her eyes were human, sad, tired. She reached out one skeletal hand and placed it on Brennan's head. He flinched, but didn't pull away.
When she spoke, her voice was like wind through dry grass. "You speak truth. You carry guilt. But words are not enough. The debt must be paid." "Then take me," Brennan said. "Let the others go, but take me." The ghost woman tilted her head, considering. Then she looked past Brennan at the rest of us. Her gaze lingered on each man in turn, and I felt like she was looking into our souls, weighing us, judging us. Finally, she spoke again. "The guilty must pay, but not all guilt is equal. You," she pointed at Brennan, "you killed with your hands, you took lives, but you also carry remorse. You have suffered." She turned and pointed at the Kiva entrance, where the silver crates were visible. "But there are others who are guilty, those who profit from our land, those who take and take and give nothing back. Those who see my people as obstacles to be removed. The mining company, I said, understanding. Ezra Whitmore and the Ganado Mining Company, they're the ones who pushed for the route through the Painted Desert. They're the ones who wanted us to take the direct path, even though it meant crossing Navajo land. They knew, So said quietly. They knew about the Chindi. They knew this route was dangerous, but they didn't care. They wanted the silver delivered quickly, and they were willing to risk our lives to do it. The ghost woman nodded slowly. The debt must be paid, but not by you alone, soldier, by all who profit from injustice. What do you want? Brennan asked. Return the silver to the earth, she said. It was taken from our land without permission. Return it and carry our story. Tell the world what was done to us. Make sure we are remembered. Make sure our deaths meant something. And if we do this, I asked, you'll let us go? We will let the remorseful go, but those who carry no guilt, who feel no remorse, her eyes glowed brighter. They belong to us. I looked at the men around me. Most were terrified, but willing. They wanted to live, and if that meant dumping $50,000 in silver into the desert, so be it. But James Crawford stepped forward, his face twisted with anger. To hell with this, he snarled. I'm not giving up a fortune because some Indian ghosts want revenge. They're already dead. What more do they want? Crawford, shut up, Kowalski hissed. But Crawford was beyond reason. We fought a war to take this land. We won. That's how the world works. The strong take from the weak. And I'll be damned if I'm going to apologize for it. The ghost woman's expression didn't change, but I saw the other ghost riders begin to move. They dismounted from their horses and began walking towards us, slowly, inevitably. Crawford, get back, I shouted, but it was too late. The ghost woman reached out and touched Crawford's chest. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, and I watched in horror as his body began to change. His skin dried out, turning gray and leathery. His eyes sunk into his skull. His mouth opened in a scream that went on and on, even as his body withered and collapsed. When it was over, Crawford was dead, his body nothing but a dried husk, and standing next to his corpse was a new ghost, Crawford's spirit, trapped and screaming, his eyes glowing with that same sickly green light. We'll do it, I said quickly. We'll return the silver. We'll tell your story. Just please let us go. The ghost woman nodded. Then do it now, before dawn comes. Bury the silver in the sacred place and speak the words of return.
We worked through the night, carrying the silver crates down from the kiva and out into the desert. Justine Netso led us to a place about half a mile from the Pueblo ruin, a natural amphitheater in the rock, where a spring bubbled up from the ground. This is a sacred place, Tso explained. The ancient ones used it for ceremonies. The water here is blessed. If we bury the silver here and perform the proper ritual, it will be returned to the earth in the right way. We dug in the sandy soil near the spring, using our hands and knives and anything we could find. The ghost riders watched from a distance, silent sentinels in the darkness. The ghost woman stood closest, the dead child still in her arms, waiting.
It took us 2 hours to dig a hole deep enough. We placed the silver crates inside, one by one. $50,000 in refined silver buried in the desert, never to be recovered. When the last crate was in the ground, Justine So began to sing. It was a Navajo prayer, ancient and beautiful, asking the earth to accept this gift, asking forgiveness for what had been taken. We covered the silver with sand and stones, erasing any trace of what we'd done. When it was finished, Brennan stood over the burial site and spoke. "I swear on my life and my soul that I will tell the truth about what happened at Bidahochi. I will make sure the world knows about the innocent people who died there. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I did." The ghost woman watched him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been satisfaction, or forgiveness, or just exhaustion. "It is enough for now." She turned to the other ghost riders and spoke in Navajo. They began to fade, like smoke dissipating in the wind. One by one, they disappeared, until only the woman and child remained. She looked at each of us in turn, and when her eyes met mine, I felt a profound sadness wash over me. These were people who had been murdered for no reason, who had suffered for 23 years, trapped between worlds. And even now, even with justice partially served, they could not fully rest. "Remember us," she said. "That is all we ask. Remember that we lived. Remember that we were innocent. Remember that we mattered." Then she and the child faded away, and we were alone in the desert. The sun rose over the painted desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. We stood in silence, exhausted, traumatized, but alive. Of the 12 men who had left Fort Defiance, only 8 remained. Brennan, myself, Kowalski, Tso, and 4 enlisted men. What do we tell them? What do we tell the army, the mining company? "The truth," Brennan said firmly. "We tell them exactly what happened, and if they don't believe us, that's their problem." We began the long ride back to Fort Defiance. We had no silver, no proof of our story except our own testimony and the bodies we'd left behind. We knew there would be consequences, court-martials probably, or worse. But as we rode, I felt lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. We had faced something ancient and terrible, and we had survived. More than that, we had done the right thing, even though it cost us dearly. When we reached Fort Defiance 3 days later, we were met with disbelief and anger. Ezra Whitmore, the mining company owner, accused us of stealing the silver. The army launched an investigation. Captain Brennan was court-martialed for dereliction of duty and loss of government property. But Brennan stuck to his story. He testified about the massacre at Bidahochi, about the ghost riders, about the debt that had to be paid. He was convicted and dishonorably discharged, but he never recanted. After his discharge, Brennan dedicated his life to telling the story of what happened at Bidahochi. He traveled to newspapers, gave speeches, wrote letters. Most people dismissed him as a madman, but some listened, and slowly the truth began to spread. The Navajo people, who had always known the truth, welcomed his testimony. They helped him document the names of those who had died,
helped him piece together the full story of that terrible morning in 1858. I stayed in touch with Hustine Tso over the years. He returned to his people and became a respected elder, a keeper of stories and traditions. Once, years later, I asked him if he thought the Chindi were truly at peace now. He considered the question carefully before answering. "The dead are never truly at peace," he said, "not when they died violently, unjustly. But acknowledgement helps. Truth helps. Knowing that their story will be remembered, that their deaths meant something, that helps." "Do you think they'll come back?" I asked. "The Ghost Riders?" "Perhaps," Tso said, "if the injustice continues, if the land continues to be taken without respect, if the old debts are forgotten. The desert remembers everything, Lieutenant, and sometimes it demands payment."
In 1889, the Ganado Mining Company went bankrupt. Ezra Whitmore died under mysterious circumstances. His body was found in the desert, dried out and withered, his face frozen in an expression of terror. The official cause of death was listed as exposure, but those who saw the body knew better. The Pueblo ruin where we faced the Ghost Riders was declared off-limits by the Navajo Nation. To this day, it remains unvisited, a place where the living do not go. And sometimes, travelers in the Painted Desert report seeing riders on the horizon at sunset, 23 figures on horseback, watching, waiting, making sure the old deaths are not forgotten.
I'm an old man now, writing this account in 1924, 43 years after those terrible nights in the Painted Desert. Captain Brennan died last year at the age of 82. He never stopped telling the story of Bidahochi, never stopped trying to make amends. The world has changed since 1881. The frontier is gone, the Indian wars are over. The Navajo people have been confined to reservations, their land taken, their way of life disrupted, but they endure, they remember. I've spent my life thinking about what happened out there in the desert, about justice and guilt and the debts we owe to those we've wronged. I've come to believe that the Ghost Riders were not monsters, they were not evil, they were simply people who had been denied justice in life and sought it in death. And maybe that's the real horror of the story. Not that ghosts exist, but that we create them. Every act of injustice, every innocent life taken, every wrong that goes unacknowledged, these things don't just disappear, they linger, they accumulate, and eventually they demand payment. The Navajo people have a saying, "The land remembers." It remembers every drop of blood spilled on it, every broken promise, every act of violence. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the guilty return to the scene of their crimes, the land calls forth its memories. The Ghost Riders still ride in the Painted Desert. I know this because I've received letters over the years from travelers who have seen them, always at sunset, always 23 riders, always watching. If you ever find yourself in the Painted Desert at sunset and you see riders on the horizon, remember this. They are not there to harm the innocent. They are there to remind us, to make sure we don't forget what was done, to ensure that the dead are remembered and honored. Do not fear them, but do not dismiss them either. Acknowledge them, remember their story, and if you carry guilt for wrongs you've committed, face it, speak it, make amends while you still can. Because the desert remembers everything, and the ghost riders of the Navajo never stop watching. They are patient. They can wait decades, generations even, for justice to be served. And when the debt comes due, it will be paid, one way or another. I am Jacob Thornton. I am 87 years old, and I am the last living witness to the events of August 1881. And I am telling you this story not to frighten you, but to warn you. Respect the land, honor the dead, acknowledge the wrongs of the past, and never ever ignore a native warning. Because some debts transcend death, and the ghost riders of the Navajo never stop watching. Always watching.